everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, Identity and Influence. I'm your host, Mo. Today we have a special guest again,
Yes,
Dr. Lem
sir.
Usita. What is going on, brother?
Hey, man, it's always good to have these conversations with you. It's a great day today, man. Looking forward to our conversation.
Always a good time. Dr. Lem has written extensively on leadership, identity, influence. I call him the identity guy. And today we are going to be talking about a focus of one of his leadership lessons. Love the title, as I always do, When Leaders Follow. And this article resonated with me because it really flips the traditional leadership model on its head. Instead of the leader being the sole decision maker, you argue that great leadership is about empowering followers to lead. So, can you just give the audience an overview of what the article says and why you wrote it?
Yeah, there are two kind of main ideas. One, I think I was reacting to a leader that was micromanaging. So, I address a little bit about that. And then when I was in my doctoral program, I read a book about the team the team discipline for leadership. And so kind of the idea is there are some decisions that the leader of the organization or the leader of the team need to make. But there are some decisions that the team discipline can, of leadership. Like you can empower the team to make certain decisions. And so this article really focuses on this idea of empowering your team, and you don't have to control every single little outcome, every little single action in order to still be a great leader.
The issues that you hit in this should resonate with more leaders than probably do. I think
Yeah,
some people probably need to work on this a little bit. And
yeah,
so, when talking about the difference between control and leadership, one of the points that you make early in the article is about the difference between command and control, both
yeah,
great military terms. A king, a micromanager, somebody that is in charge in that kind of way desires to be in control. Can you
right.
break that down and help us understand what you mean by that?
So if you were to read the article, I actually allude to Leadership Lesson 6, which is entitled Command and Out of Control, which we haven't gone over yet. So maybe we'll do that one next. But in that article, I mentioned Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink. It's about rapid cognition and snap judgments, like how do you make decisions quickly. And he mentions General Paul Van Riper, who introduces the idea of being in command and out of control. And the idea suggests that successful leadership doesn't require controlling every action or outcome, like I just mentioned, because a leader can lead through any outcome or any action. But it just kind of highlights that to be a leader and to command as a leader doesn't necessarily mean you need control over every little action or every outcome. And so a micromanager really wants to micromanage every action and outcome. So really you're not leading. If the micromanager is managing you, you're just carrying out what the micromanager wants you to do. You're not really leading. You're just doing what he says or what she says. And so when you're told what to do, you're being managed and you're not leading. And then a micromanager even has that word manager in it, so they're not leading. And yeah, so this article kind of responds to that. Like you can still lead and be in command, but not necessarily control. You don't need to control every action.
In your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges for leaders that they face when trying to let go of control and allow their followers to step up?
So it depends on the situation. Like there's a balance. Well, it's not a balance. It's just being strategic about how to do it. You don't want to completely let go of control. And you notice I said you don't need to control everything. So you maintain a level of control, but you don't have to everything. You allow your followers to step up. You allow your team to make decisions. But it all depends on the situation. And I think it also depends on the personality of that micromanager. Like a micromanager has a particular personality where that's just how they lead. They want to manage, they might want to micromanage every action and every outcome. And it can be seen as leadership. And I've seen it many times personality plays a role in this. And then I also think maturity and security in your leadership style plays a role. I think the more seasoned and the more secure you are in your leadership, the easier it is for you to give up control of certain things, but still be the leader, still be in command. And I think maturity and security allows you to know what part of this I could give up and what part of this I can hold on to. So personality plays a factor. I think your maturity and security in your leadership also play a factor.
You mentioned that when a leader empowers their team, which they should, they shift from managing every move to, quote, just showing up, close quote. But you clarify that showing up doesn't mean being passive. So, can you
Right.
explain what that really means for a leader?
Yeah, so it's again, it's not totally giving all control. You give some control. Showing up has to do with developing leaders. You show up for your team. You empower your team, you give them some control, and you're active in their development. You're active in the way that they're carrying that out. You don't just passively sit back and watch and just let them go. That's not developing. That's just passively sitting and watching. And so showing up means that you're there. You're watching what they're doing. You're jumping in when you need to jump in. You empower them to lead, and then you lead yourself. Like you show them how to do it. You do it by example.
How can a leader start empowering their team members to step up into leadership roles? And when do they do it?
You know, yeah, a couple of years ago, I worked for this organization, and I told the leader when I went in his office, and this was only like, you know, days of being there, and I said, you do not have a leadership culture here. And he's like, we got a bunch of leaders. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying you don't have a bunch of leaders, but you don't have a leadership culture here. There are leaders and you got followers, and you might have leaders, but it's not like a leadership culture. I think transitioning from leading leaders, I think only secure leaders can do this. An insecure leader won't be able to lead leaders. And so, what it looks like in action is you start by giving them a vision of who they can be as a leader. And then, as a leader, with the higher leadership in it, you should be able to see the potential, then paint the picture for them to see that, to help them see themselves as a leader and then help them get there. You raise their leadership lid as their leader. If you're just telling them to do stuff without painting the picture for them and giving them a vision for themselves, then you're just micromanaging things. You know what I mean? So being there for them, mentoring and coaching and developing them as leaders is something I think only a secure leader could do. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a paradigm shift. When you could still lead it followers, right? That's just like one level of it. But to lead leaders, I think is just that next level of it.
My goal is not just to lead followers. I want to lead leaders. And so that's what Rising Tide is all about. In this article, you mentioned that a leader's limitations become the limitations of the team. And man, that one got me right here because over the years, I've learned my limitations because the men and women who speak into my life, my mentors and coaches,
Yeah.
they're honest, sometimes brutally honest, because they
Mhm.
need to be, because I've got things that I'm messed up in still, even 30 years later in the leadership journey.
Right.
Man, that's
Right.
a powerful thought. Can you share an example in your own leadership journey where a leader's
Yeah.
inability to empower others created a bottleneck?
Yeah. Um, the first thought that came to mind is you're only as strong as your weakest link, And so, and then the next thought is if the bottleneck is your leadership lid. Your leadership lid might be your personality or your insecurity in leadership. And then I thought about how like a micromanager, again, I think that was the focus of this thing, and that's why I wrote about it. A micromanager can't inspire because they're not leaders. They can't cast vision because they're not a leader. They will want the accolades and they'll want the praise and they might even look like a leader, but they won't care about you as a person and help develop you. And it'll just be about the task. And so when you're working for a leader that's a micromanager, like the bottleneck is it's not about you. It's just about doing task. And so you're not necessarily developing as a leader. They're not necessarily developing leaders. Empowering but empowering leaders is pretty messy and it's harder than managing because it's people, not process. But you'll grow and your team will grow and learn from this experience. Micromanagers will want to manage the process to get their desired outcome. But if it doesn't inspire you or invigorate your leadership, then you're just going to burn people out. Like that's what micromanagers do, right? Because then it's just about the thing, the process, and not about the people. So their inability to empower will burn them out. Like the greatest example, I have a couple examples of, micromanagers that I've worked for. And so I'll just kind of speak about it generally. I'll like morph the two. Somebody listening to this can't tell who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But but what happens with micromanagers and their leadership, the bottleneck is it becomes about the process. It becomes about the project. It becomes about the work and not the people. Again, micromanagers aren't developing people. And so like you can live I can live under that for a season, but then it gets tiring for me because I want to grow as a leader. I don't want to just like pump out widgets. You know what I mean? And that's what a micromanager cares about. They just want to pump out the widgets. They just want to, manage the process. And I think you'll burn people out because you're not getting the praise and you're not getting the development as a team member because your micromanager isn't necessarily inspiring you to step it up as a leader. And so the bottleneck, I mean, you can get a lot of stuff done with a micromanager, but you're not necessarily growing teams and growing leaders. So
What I hear is that the leader had a low leadership lid, which
yeah,
causes everybody else to hit their head against that ceiling. And if they have a higher leadership lid than the leader,
yeah,
then they're just going to get frustrated and leave, which is what you ended up doing.
right,
When in reality,
right,
if that leader would have been able to grow, you might have stuck around. Did that
for
leader?
sure.
So do those leaders just not know it, or they think they're leading well?
I, I I think you could go back to our management and leadership episode. There is a place for a micromanager. There is. You know what I mean? If you need a process in place and you want to burn out people, and I've seen it. I know of organizations that do it. Like, put that micromanager in place, it'll happen. That's what a McDonald's manager is doing. There's a process that's set up, and like burgers and fries are made in this particular way, and we just need people to work the line. And so in those cases, like I think there's a place for them. You know what I mean? So if you have somebody micromanaging in the right place, I think it works because they're managing a process. But don't call that person leader. Don't say that he's developing leaders because he's not.
Right.
And so I think that's the difference. Like put leaders in a place to inspire leaders. Put managers in a place to manage the process. And just know the difference. That's what that episode that we recorded before talks about. And so yeah, I don't think micromanagers can grow out of it unless like if it's their personality that's driving their micromanaging, they're never gonna grow out of it because that's their personality. And that's okay. If it's their insecurity that's driving them to micromanage, I think they can grow in their leadership. I think they can grow in uh their security, their insecurities. They can definitely grow in their insecurities as a leader and then move out of it. So I think that I think that answers your questions. And if it's an insecurity thing, some cannot if it's a personality thing.
Have you known somebody who's embraced the concept of building leaders and then started building leaders instead of just followers? And did they
Yeah.
get good results from that?
So interestingly enough, I had a pastor working for me, and he was great at developing leaders. He developed all of his leaders in their leadership. And then, the organization then hired all of his people in major leadership roles because he developed these leaders, and then they eventually got rid of him because he just didn't fit. And so it's an interesting, it was just kind of an interesting dynamic where he developed all of his people, and then the larger organization took all of his people and put them in lead roles, major roles, because he had developed them well. Yeah, I've worked for leaders that have inspired the team to grow as leaders. I worked for one particular leader who he was a VP at the time, and we were all his directors, and he developed us as leaders. And then when we all stepped out of our leadership role, we all got an opportunity to level up, and he inspired us as leaders. We all got positions that were a level up from when we were working with him because he developed us in leadership. And so leaders can definitely raise your leadership lid because they have that ability to inspire the team, empower the team, and develop the team.
How do leaders get the right balance between letting go of control and still giving the necessary guidance?
I don't think it's a balance. Like I was saying earlier, you can still be in control and provide guidance. It's not like you get rid of one or the other. And then if you have to think about it as far as balance is concerned, depending on the leader, some leaders can have more control and less guidance, right? A very young leader, you only give a little bit control to and more guidance. And so I guess it's a sliding scale. I guess it's balanced. So depending on the team member and what they need, if you know that they can handle control, then you don't need to provide as much guidance. If you know that they need more guidance, then you know to not give them that much control. So I think that's the balance, like knowing the team member and knowing what they need more of. So you never give up leadership responsibility, but you can give up some control and you always provide that guidance depending on the team member. You know, where on the scale to give them more control or more guidance.
In the article, you talk about helping followers become leaders, and then there's dynamic change. A little bit later on, you say it's not about delegating tasks, it's about developing people. What do you mean by that? And if we are all part of a program somewhere in some company, we've got to get our
Sure.
tasks done. So if it's not about delegating tasks, but developing people, how do you do both without stifling people and their growth?
So when I was vice president for student life at a college, I developed a leadership program, right? And these leaders that were in my program ended up being in leadership roles at the college, right? And so they were doing the task. But on top of doing that task, one of the things that I tasked them with was find a replacement. So you're doing the task, but then you identify somebody that you can apprentice, somebody that can come alongside you, that you can teach the task to, so that when you move on from that role, when you graduate or whatever, there's somebody that steps in. You see what I'm saying? So like, yes, you're doing the task, but it's that mindset of like, let me train somebody as I'm doing this so that somebody else knows how to do this task. And it's really working themselves out of the job, right? Because they're all going to graduate one day and we're going to need to find new people. It was always easier when my leaders would apprentice someone, would mentor someone to move into that role. And then like hiring for that position ended up being pretty easy because we had already in the process identified somebody that could take that role. And so it's easy transition. And then the next year, that student leader to say, all right, you're doing the job. Find somebody that you can mentor, you know, to move into this role because eventually you're going to leave. And so you can do the task and you can bring people along. So you're empowering somebody to empower the team, and then you're building up leaders. And then you're developing that leadership culture.
What's one key takeaway that you would tell our listeners?
It's about leaders developing leaders and have as leaders that follow leaders. So if you don't inspire, and then you're the only leader, and it's still possible to call yourself a leader because you're up top, but blaming, but I think what happens, because I've seen this, is a leader that doesn't inspire starts looking at his team and kind of complaining like, man, they don't get it. And here's the deal. If you as the leader are saying that they don't get it, that's your fault. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like I've heard leaders say, like, yeah, they don't get it. Well, then they don't get it because you haven't led. That's your fault. You haven't empowered and inspired leaders to step it up. You haven't created a leadership culture. And so it's one thing to lead, it's a whole nother thing, I think, to lead leaders and create a leadership culture.
It's either your vision's off and it's just horrible, or you need to do a better job communicating it, but it's definitely your fault. Let's say somebody is struggling with this shift.
Yeah.
What's a small step that they can do to get away from that and start to lead leaders instead of just leading followers?
I think the first thing you need to do is you need to stop and you need to look around and ask yourself, is anyone following? Start there. You know what I mean? Because you can't develop leaders if there isn't anyone following. So, like, figure out who's following. Once you figure out who's following, then how do I empower and inspire those that are following me to be better leaders? Once you've identified who's following, just empower them and develop them and start building them up as leaders.
Where can my followers find more insights, more of your work? Where can they find you?
Well, the first place is to go to the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, family of podcasts. This one
That's
happens to
right.
be Identity and Influence. So you can find that on YouTube. And then you can also find me at Lem Usita on YouTube. And I give, well, all of those episodes are on there, but then I also give insights into identity and identity formation. You know, my identity stuff shows up there as well. So find us on YouTube, Rising Tide Leadership, or Lem Usita on YouTube.
Leaders. Stop
Yep.
letting them be followers and start making them leaders. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on the Rising Tide Leadership Identity and Influence podcast. Dr. Lamb, thanks a lot, brother. Awesome as always.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.